She was one of the richest women in America, elegant, brutal, undefeated. The kind of woman who could silence a boardroom with a raised brow or crush a competitor with a single sentence over lunch. Clare Whitmore was 39, worth over $5 billion, and as far as the public could see, untouchable. Her empire stretched from San Francisco to Singapore, her name etched into luxury towers and biotech patents alike. She never apologized, never explained, and certainly never played games she didn't intend to win. But on a quiet Tuesday evening in the private conference lounge of Whitmore Global's New York headquarters, she looked up from her handcrafted marble chessboard and said something so wildly out of character that even the security footage would later be questioned. Across from her stood Elijah Brooks, the janitor, a man in gray coveralls, barely acknowledged in the corridors, known only for his silence and spotless floors. She told him with a smirk half born of boredom and challenge, "Beat me in chess, and I'll marry you." She expected awkward laughter, maybe a shake of the head, maybe nothing at all. What she did not expect, what no one expected, was for him to quietly take the seat opposite her and beat her in 3 moves. No rematch, no hesitation, no celebration, just calm execution. The footage went viral within hours. Headlines erupted. Social media speculated. Who was this man? Was it a joke, a trap, a scandal waiting to unfold? But the real story, what none of them saw coming, was buried not in the chess game, but in what followed. Because Clare hadn't just underestimated a man. She'd triggered the return of a ghost from a past she had long tried to bury. And Elijah Brooks wasn't just some clever janitor with a good memory for openings. He knew things about her, about the company, and about what happened in Geneva all those years ago. And now the pieces weren't just on the board, they were moving. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The moment Elijah Brooks moved his final piece across that marble chessboard, something shifted. Not just on the 42nd floor of Whitmore Global, but across the entire foundation of Clare Whitmore's empire. The smirk on her lips never fully disappeared, but those who knew her best, her personal assistant, her head of security, the executive team watching from behind tinted glass, said her eyes changed. For a woman who once stood unshaken during a congressional hearing, who dismantled hostile takeovers with a single line of sarcasm, it wasn't the loss that shook her. It was him. Because deep down, Clare recognized Elijah. Not his face, perhaps. Not at first. But something in the way he held her gaze. Calm, unafraid, and far too familiar. The media spun it as a romantic oddity. The queen of corporate America, outplayed by a janitor. But those closest to her knew better. The next morning, Clare canceled 3 international meetings. Later that week, her board of directors quietly initiated an internal audit. Something about unusual financial discrepancies dating back nearly a decade. Then came the leaked emails, anonymous tips, and that old grainy photo from a gala in Geneva. Clare in a red dress and a younger Elijah, not in a janitor's uniform but in a tuxedo. Arm in arm, smiling. So who is Elijah Brooks? Why would a man with a photographic memory, a silent nature, and no digital footprint work a night shift cleaning glass towers? And why would Clare Whitmore, a woman with no room for sentiment, dare challenge someone like him with a wager so absurd, unless she already knew how dangerous it was? What was this really about? Was it revenge? Was it leverage? Or was it something deeper? Something that began long before the first pawn moved? Because the truth is, that game of chess was never about love. It was about power. And Elijah didn't just win. He came back to claim something that had once been his. And this time, he wasn't playing to impress her. He was playing to expose her. Clare Whitmore was never the kind of woman you accidentally bumped into in an elevator. If you saw her coming, you moved. If she asked a question, you answered in bullet points. At 39, she stood at the helm of Whitmore Global, a tech conglomerate her father had built but she had weaponized. Under Claire's leadership, it went from a respected software firm into a force that swallowed biotech startups and negotiated directly with foreign governments. She had no spouse, no children, and no tolerance for mistakes. Employees said she never laughed. She calculated. Her calendar was blocked in 15-minute intervals, her wardrobe a monochrome of sleek precision. And yet, every evening, without fail, Claire would end her day alone in the 42nd floor lounge, seated before a custom marble chessboard commissioned from Prague. It wasn't for relaxation. It was ritual. Power sharpened in silence. Some said it was how she meditated. Others believed she was practicing for something much more strategic. She never invited anyone to play, until Elijah Brooks. Elijah had worked at Whitmore Corp for just over 2 years, but you'd be forgiven for never noticing. He moved like mist, never in the way, never in a rush. He wore the same perfectly ironed gray coveralls each day, nodded politely but rarely spoke, and handled his mop and cart with the care of a violinist tuning before a concert. No one knew where he went when he clocked out, and no one had seen him eat. When the building's AI-powered facial recognition system upgraded, his name didn't appear in the executive database. HR claimed he was contracted through a third-party vendor. But when that vendor was contacted, no one could confirm who had signed his onboarding paperwork. His ID badge worked. His locker stayed locked. His floor assignments rotated without complaint. And yet, in boardroom whispers, you'd hear someone say, "That janitor?" He was standing outside the CEO's office the night the stock dropped. And again, when that whistleblower vanished. Another would murmur, "He doesn't talk much, but he sees everything." He was easy to dismiss until you realized Claire never dismissed him. She didn't speak to him either, but she never moved when he entered a room. She didn't lower her voice. And one evening, without warning, she invited him into her sanctuary, the chess room. What no one knew at the time was that this wasn't their first meeting. It was a reunion. One Claire hoped he had forgotten. One Elijah had waited over a decade for. It began like any other Tuesday evening inside Whitmore Global's gleaming Manhattan headquarters. The sky outside the 42nd floor was bleeding amber into steel as Clare Whitmore sat alone, sipping chilled water from a crystal glass and silently studying the arrangement of carved ebony and ivory pieces before her. Her heels rested beside the table. Her phone faced down. Her mind elsewhere. The board had been set for hours, untouched. White queen angled just slightly forward as if waiting for a worthy adversary. And for the first time in weeks she felt restless. Not the kind of restlessness money could soothe, but something deeper, a hunger for disruption. That's when she noticed him. Elijah Brooks, wiping down the glass doors near the terrace. Silent, methodical, and just slow enough to betray that he wasn't cleaning. He was watching. She didn't flinch. Instead, without lifting her gaze, Claire said coolly, "You play?" Elijah didn't answer. He paused, finished his wipe, reached for the handle of the bucket and turned away. And then, with a dry, bemused chuckle that barely reached her throat, she added, "Beat me in chess, and I'll marry you." The air hung still. No one laughed. No one ever did. But this time, something unexpected happened. Elijah didn't walk away. He placed his cleaning cloth neatly over the cart, took a slow breath, and without asking, without seeking permission, he pulled out the leather chair across from her and sat. Not like a janitor, not like a subordinate, like an equal, like a man returning to a familiar battlefield. Claire's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened slightly around her queen. He said nothing, didn't ask which color he was, just reached for the black pawn and opened with e5. She replied with white knight to f3. He countered. Then 3 moves later, precisely 3, Claire found her king boxed in, her queen hanging, and her entire strategy neutralized by a sequence so elegant, so brutal, It could only be executed by someone who had spent years studying, not just the game, but her. For a full 10 seconds, the room fell so quiet you could hear the HVAC hum. Claire stared at the board, then at him. Elijah stood, nodded once, and began to walk away. But before he could reach the door, her voice, sharp, shaken, cut through the stillness. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't stop walking. He didn't answer. He just kept moving, as if this entire moment had already played out in his mind years ago. The next morning, the chessboard was gone, removed from the lounge by order of Claire herself. But what couldn't be removed was the surveillance footage. Overhead security cam, time-stamped, high resolution, 37 seconds of silence, 3 moves, a billionaire's bet, and a janitor's victory. Someone from the night crew leaked it. By noon, it was everywhere. Headlines across finance blogs, gossip sites, and mainstream news. Janitor beats billionaire CEO in 3 moves, marriage proposal on record. Within hours, the video crossed 100 million views. Analysts speculated on whether it was a PR stunt. Social media turned Elijah into a cult hero. Memes, reaction videos, breakdowns of the chess opening he used. The term janitor's gambit trended globally, but inside Whitmore Global, no one was laughing. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Investors demanded statements. Shareholders wanted clarity. Was Claire compromised? Manipulated? The stock dipped. Rumors swelled. HR initiated a full review of personnel files. Elijah Brooks was suddenly at the center of an internal investigation, but when they attempted to pull his file, they hit something unusual. His employment history was incomplete. No educational background, no social security matches. The cleaning contractor claimed he had been onboarded by Whitmore's facilities team, but there was no signature, no documentation. Just an active ID badge and a locker that was already empty. Elijah had stopped showing up. Just vanished. Then came the email, sent anonymously to every member of Whitmore Global's board. No subject line, no salutation. Just 6 words typed in bold. Ask her about Geneva, 2011. Attached was a single JPEG. A blurry photo of a woman. Red dress, champagne glass, Clare Whitmore. And beside her, a man in a tuxedo, head tilted, smiling. Elijah Brooks. The photo was dated 15 years earlier. Taken at a private fundraiser hosted by the Whitmore Foundation. It hadn't been seen publicly. It wasn't part of any archived media, which meant someone close still had access, or someone very patient had waited years to release it. By day 5, a whistleblower from inside Whitmore's audit division stepped forward, privately. He claimed there had been unusual movements in Claire's personal expense accounts dating back a decade. Fund transfers, campaign donations, off-the-books travel payments tied to Geneva. "It's not just Elijah," he said. "It's her too. And if they both knew each other back then, this isn't a story about a chess game, it's about something they buried together." But the question remained, why resurface now? Why would a man like Elijah, invisible for so long, stage his reappearance so publicly, so boldly? And what exactly happened in Geneva, 2011, that both of them had worked so hard to forget? The media frenzy turned into a storm. Claire stopped appearing in public. Legal teams began quietly assembling. And as speculation churned, another image surfaced, sharper this time. A full-length shot of Elijah in that same tuxedo, arm around Claire's waist, both of them laughing under a chandelier. Only this time the file didn't come from a journalist. It came from someone inside the Whitmore family trust. 15 years earlier, long before the headlines, the boardrooms, and the global mergers, Clare Whitmore was still a rising executive, ambitious, sharp, and desperate to step out of her father's shadow. The Whitmore Foundation, her family's philanthropic arm, funded elite youth programs in everything from science to sports to the arts. One such initiative was a national chess fellowship designed to sponsor underprivileged prodigies. It was under that banner that a 26-year-old Claire first met Elijah Brooks, then just 24 and already defeating masters twice his age. He was brilliant, charming, and completely unafraid to meet her eyes, something even senior executives rarely did. At first, it was just business. She introduced him at galas, pushed his talent in media appearances, and made him the face of the Foundation's rising star narrative. But behind closed doors, the line blurred. They shared late-night conversations, strategy sessions that turned personal and eventually a secret relationship, one Clare insisted remain hidden. What happened next wasn't scandalous by tabloid standards. It was quieter, colder. When Clare's promotion to vice president became imminent, she abruptly cut all ties. No explanation. No goodbye. Elijah received a formal letter terminating his fellowship and a legal warning about discussing anything personal with the media. Behind the scenes, his speaking invitations dried up. Tournament entries were declined. Sponsors vanished, and whispers followed him. Unreliable, difficult, unstable. Within 2 years, Elijah Brooks, the chess prodigy who once played exhibitions against grandmasters, was gone from the circuit entirely. Some say he disappeared. He didn't. He recalculated. Years passed. And when Whitmore Global's New York headquarters expanded its private janitorial contracts in 2021, one name quietly slipped onto the roster: Elijah Brooks. No longer the man in tailored suits and strategy seminars, but in coveralls, pushing a mop through the same marble halls that once toasted his future. But he hadn't come for revenge. He came for answers. And for Clare, who had become more powerful than ever, that scared her more than any lawsuit could. After the chess game went viral and the company's stock began to tremble, Clare didn't report him. She didn't fire him. Instead, she reached out, privately, offered him a formal position, not as janitor, but as a quiet observer. "Watch everything," she said. "Tell me what I can't see." It wasn't an act of mercy. It was strategy. She knew something was coming. Internal dissent, boardroom whispers, possibly a coup. She needed someone who could listen without speaking, a ghost with a memory like a machine. And Elijah, in his silence, agreed. What Clare didn't know was that Elijah had already begun his own endgame. Weeks before their match, he'd anonymously reached out to investigative journalists, sharing fragments of documents, internal memos, and flagged transactions connected to Geneva 2011. He'd watched how information moved, who responded, who didn't. Each breadcrumb tested the system for leaks and loyalties. So was the chess match her test, or his? Had Clare meant to see if he still had the edge? Or had Elijah allowed her to think that, just long enough to get into the room? Because in chess, control is rarely in the obvious move. And Elijah Brooks was never playing for show. He was playing for checkmate. The pressure inside Whitmore Global reached a breaking point within days. What began as viral curiosity had spiraled into a full-scale crisis. The board's internal audit, which had been quietly launched under the guise of routine financial hygiene, turned up a web of inconsistencies too complex to ignore. Offshore transfers, phantom subsidiaries, campaign donations laundered through shell charities, and at the center of it all, not Clare directly, but the very executives she had once trusted to safeguard the empire. She hadn't been blind. She'd been patient. And now, she was done pretending to hold the reins while they hollowed out her legacy from the inside. 11 days after the chess video went viral, Clare Whitmore stood at a podium flanked by her legal team and delivered a brief but staggering public statement. The media had expected denial, spin, or even silence. Instead, she looked straight into the cameras and said calmly, "I made a promise. I lost. I intend to keep it. But marriage is no longer the prize. Freedom is." The press scrambled to decode it. Social media lit up with speculation. But the truth was far more calculated than anyone assumed. Clare had orchestrated the chess match not as a publicity stunt, but as a fuse, a public spectacle that would draw eyes to what was happening behind the walls. She knew Elijah would win. She knew he still had it. and she knew that by letting him beat her in front of the world, she could trigger the exact chaos she needed to burn the rot from within. It worked. Over the next 3 weeks, 3 senior executives resigned. 2 faced federal indictments. Internal shareholders voted to restructure the board. Clare formally stepped down as CEO and relinquished her voting power, by choice. Not in disgrace, but in defiance. She left behind her name, her title, and the company that had once been her prison. And then, just as suddenly, Elijah vanished. No formal goodbye, no interviews, no book deals or podcasts. Just a deactivated badge and a locker cleared out long before security could freeze his access. But not everyone was surprised. Clare wasn't. She never searched for him, never issued a statement explaining his role. To the public, Elijah Brooks became a symbol of mystery, of rebellion, of quiet intelligence in a world addicted to noise. But to Clare, he had always been more than that. Weeks later, a private security guard working overtime on the 42nd floor lounge filed an unusual report. Just after 2 a.m., he had walked by the closed doors and heard something faint. A clock ticking. The gentle scrape of a chair. Inside, Clare Whitmore sat once again at her marble chessboard. The pieces were still. No opponent across from her. But then, according to the report, someone stepped into the room. Not a ghost, not a memory. Elijah Brooks. No cameras, no audience, no board even. Just 2 people in silence. No game played. Because this time, they both knew. The match had already been won. Was this about love or justice? Did Clare Whitmore orchestrate her downfall to escape the empire that had become her cage, or to right the wrong she once helped bury? Was Elijah Brooks merely a pawn, placed back on the board after years in the shadows, or had he always been the true king, waiting patiently to make his move when the world least expected it? He could have gone public, could have sought revenge. Instead, he returned without fanfare, walked into her world in silence, and left it shattered, but cleaner. What would you have done in Clare's place? Or in his? Would you have invited him to play again? Or would you have pulled the plug on the board before the first piece moved? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. And if you thought this was wild, wait until you hear about the woman who faked her own death to expose her husband's betrayal. Subscribe now. You don't want to miss what's coming next.